It was supposed to be just another day, but when a struggling single mom and her son were beaten and thrown out by her own family, no one expected a billionaire to step in and change their lives forever. What happened next will restore your faith and kindness. Please, before you start watching this story, support us by giving this video a thumbs up, subscribe to our channel, and tell us where you're watching from. Tanya Harris stood at the back of the church, heart pounding, veil trembling slightly as her fingers gripped the bouquet. The music swelled, and all eyes turned as she began walking down the aisle. She looked stunning, soft curls framing her face, eyes gleaming with hope. But not every face in the pews was smiling. At the front, her soon-to-be husband Marcus Bellamy watched with pure admiration. He looked proud, deeply in love. But to his left sat Ruth and Harold Bellamy, his parents, looking like they just swallowed a lemon. They didn't clap. They didn't smile. They barely looked at Tanya. They didn't want her. Tanya knew it. Everyone did. It wasn't just because she was a single black mom. It was because she wasn't who they pictured for their son. Ruth had told Marcus in no uncertain terms that Tanya was damaged goods, and Harold didn't speak a word to her the first 3 times they met. Still, Marcus loved her, and that was enough for Tanya. After the ceremony, during the reception, Ruth clinked her glass and raised a toast. "To Marcus," she said, ignoring Tanya completely, "we hope you come to your senses sooner rather than later." Guests shifted uncomfortably. Tanya just smiled tightly and held Marcus's hand under the table. She didn't cry. She wouldn't give Ruth the satisfaction. Marcus had insisted on staying in the Bellamy guest house while they saved up for a home of their own. Tanya agreed. It seemed practical. But living on the Bellamy estate quickly became a nightmare. The house was big, but Ruth's cold stares made it feel like a prison. Harold treated her like a ghost. When Tanya cooked dinner, Ruth redid it. When she did laundry, Harold accused her of shrinking his shirts. Tanya's 5-year-old son, Elijah, tried to be on his best behavior. He was a sweet, quiet boy who loved toy trucks and bedtime stories. But even he wasn't spared. Ruth called him rowdy for laughing too loud, and once locked his toys in a closet because they were messy. Marcus defended them the best he could, but he was often traveling for work. Tanya was left alone with 2 people who never wanted her there. Still, she stayed. For Marcus. For Elijah. She kept believing things would get better. Then one rainy night, Elijah accidentally knocked over a vase in the hallway. It was nothing special, just a glass piece sitting on a side table. But it shattered loudly, waking the whole house. Ruth came storming in, eyes wide with fury. "This is why we told Marcus not to marry you," she screamed. "You don't belong here, and neither does that little brat." Tanya tried to explain, but the rage in Ruth's face was uncontrollable. And as Harold appeared from the bedroom and stepped toward them, Tanya's heart dropped. Tanya barely had time to react before Harold grabbed Elijah by the arm, yanking him roughly to his feet. "Keep your filthy hands off my son," Tanya shouted, stepping between them. But Harold didn't stop. His face was red with rage, veins bulging as he shouted, "You think you can just waltz into our home, bring your baggage, and break our things?" "It was an accident," Tanya cried. "He's just a kid." Before she could finish, Harold raised his hand and slapped her across the cheek. The sharp sting brought tears to her eyes, but it wasn't the pain that crushed her. It was the look of satisfaction in Harold's eyes. Elijah let out a cry and clung to her legs, terrified. Ruth stood nearby, arms crossed. "Now maybe you'll finally leave like you should have months ago." Tanya couldn't believe this was happening. Her heart pounded as she scooped Elijah into her arms. "Marcus will hear about this," she whispered, shaking with fear and fury. "He won't believe you," Ruth said smugly. "And even if he does, it won't matter. He's out of town, and you're out of this house now." Tanya was shaking as she went back to the guest house. She packed their few belongings into a duffel bag, Elijah's favorite blanket, some clothes, her wallet with just under $50. She tried calling Marcus, but his phone went straight to voicemail. By the time she opened the front door, their suitcases had already been tossed outside in the pouring rain. She wrapped Elijah in a thin coat and pulled up her hood. "We're going, baby," she whispered, voice cracking. "We'll be okay. I promise." The rain soaked through her clothes as she walked them down the long gravel driveway. She didn't have a car. Marcus had taken it on his work trip. No friends nearby, no one she could call at that hour. So she walked, one foot in front of the other, holding her son close. They ended up by an overpass near Peachtree Creek, behind a chain-link fence. Tanya tucked Elijah into a dry corner and curled her body around him like a shield. Her cheeks still burned from the slap. Her heart ached worse. She sang softly, an old lullaby her grandmother used to sing. Elijah whimpered, but eventually drifted off. Tanya didn't sleep. She just watched the cars pass overhead and wondered how love could turn into this. She gave everything she had to build a new life, and now she had nothing. Then just before dawn, headlights slowed near the edge of the underpass. A sleek black SUV came to a stop a few yards away. Tanya's breath caught in her throat. Someone stepped out. He didn't say anything at first, just stood there watching her and Elijah huddled together. Tanya pulled her son closer. "Please," she whispered, "we're not hurting anyone. Just leave us be." The man took another step closer, shielding himself under a large black umbrella. He wore a long overcoat and polished leather shoes that didn't belong anywhere near a muddy underpass. Tanya held her breath, clutching Elijah tighter, her mind racing with fear. Was he with the police? A social worker? Worse? "I'm not here to hurt you," the man said calmly. His voice was deep but gentle, almost careful. "I saw you from the road. You and your boy, you look like you could use some help." Tanya's eyes narrowed. "We're fine." The man looked at the soaking wet duffel bag beside her and the tear-streaked face of Elijah, who had just started to stir. "No, you're not," he said quietly. "I know what it looks like when someone's at the end of their rope." Tanya slowly stood up, cradling Elijah in her arms. "Look, we're just passing through. We'll be gone by morning." The man reached into his coat slowly. Tanya stiffened, but he only pulled out a wallet and flipped it open. "Name's Jackson Monroe," he said. "I run Monroe Industries, manufacturing, real estate, tech. But none of that matters right now. I saw a woman protecting her child from the rain and couldn't drive off like everyone else did." Tanya had heard of Monroe Industries. Everyone in Atlanta had. The Monroe family was one of the wealthiest in the state, known for owning half the city's high-rises. But what was someone like that doing here, under an overpass? "I don't need charity," Tanya muttered. Jackson smiled faintly. "Good, because I'm not offering charity. I'm offering a ride, a warm meal, a bed for the night, for both of you." Tanya hesitated. Every instinct told her to say no, to protect her son. But the cold was unbearable. Elijah had a slight cough already, and the idea of another night on concrete was too much. "Why?" she asked bluntly. "Why would someone like you help someone like me?" Jackson looked her in the eyes. "Because years ago, I was just a kid with a single mom sleeping in our car. Someone helped us when we had nothing. I never forgot that." Tanya's lip trembled, but she nodded slowly. "Okay, one night." He didn't push, just opened the back door of his SUV and handed her a clean towel for Elijah. The warmth of the leather seats hit Tanya like a hug. Elijah snuggled against her, instantly asleep. Tanya stayed awake the whole ride, watching the city pass through the rain-streaked window, her mind spinning. Jackson made one quiet phone call, "Get the guest suite ready," then hung up. They pulled through black iron gates and up a winding driveway that led to a grand estate. Tanya gasped. It looked like a mansion straight out of a movie. "This is your house?" she whispered. Jackson nodded. "Your room's upstairs, first door on the right. We'll talk in the morning. You've been through enough tonight." Tanya stepped inside, overwhelmed by warmth, light, and the smell of fresh linen. Sunlight poured through the tall windows of the guest suite, casting a golden glow across the room. Tanya stirred slowly, confused for a moment about where she was. Then it all came rushing back, the storm, the slap, the underpass, and Jackson Monroe. She sat up, the softest sheets she'd ever touched tangled around her legs. Elijah was still asleep beside her, snuggled deep into a mountain of pillows. His chest rose and fell steadily. He looked peaceful, safe for once. Tanya stepped quietly into the bathroom, splashed cold water on her face, and caught her reflection. Her cheek was still slightly red, but her eyes looked clearer than they had in days. She couldn't remember the last time she'd gotten more than a few hours of sleep. When she emerged, fresh clothes were waiting outside the door in a shopping bag. She blinked at the tag. Everything was brand new. Jeans, a sweater, even tiny sneakers for Elijah. Part of her wanted to reject it, to say she didn't need charity. But another part, the exhausted, protective mother in her, knew better. Pride wouldn't keep Elijah warm. She dressed him gently, then herself, and carried him down the wide staircase. The smell of pancakes and bacon led her to the kitchen. It was massive marble counters, hanging copper pots, and a kitchen island bigger than her old living room. Jackson stood at the stove, flipping pancakes like he'd done it 1,000 times. "You're cooking?" Tanya asked, surprised. Jackson grinned. "Saturday tradition. Even billionaires need carbs." She almost laughed, and then she did. A real laugh. The first one in what felt like forever. Elijah rubbed his eyes as Jackson slid a pancake onto a plate. "You hungry, little man?" Elijah nodded sleepily. "Yes, sir." Tanya watched as her son dug into the warm meal with a joy that nearly broke her. Jackson placed a plate in front of her too. "You didn't have to do all this," she said quietly. "I didn't," Jackson replied. "I wanted to." They ate in silence for a while before Tanya finally asked the question weighing on her mind. "So, what happens now?" Jackson leaned back in his chair. "That depends. What do you want to happen?" Tanya shook her head. "I don't know. I have no job, no home. My husband's family just threw me and my son out like trash." Jackson's expression hardened at that. "They're cowards." She looked at him, surprised by the anger in his voice. "You didn't deserve that," he continued, "and your son certainly didn't. But you don't have to let them define your future." Tanya's eyes filled with tears, but she wiped them away quickly. "I've always done things on my own, never relied on anyone." Jackson met her gaze. "Then maybe it's time someone relied on you. Come work for me." She blinked. "What?" "I run a foundation, helping single parents get back on their feet. I think you'd be perfect to lead part of it. You have the strength, the grit, and the heart." Tanya's mouth fell open. "You don't even know me." "I know enough," he said. "You're a fighter, and right now, you deserve someone fighting for you." Tanya spent the afternoon walking the halls of Jackson's estate with Elijah's tiny hand in hers. Everything about the place felt surreal. Crystal chandeliers, floor-to-ceiling windows, walls filled with art and photographs of Jackson with presidents, celebrities, and children from his foundation's charity work. Jackson gave them space, but his words kept echoing in her head. "Come work for me." She hadn't had a real job since before Elijah was born. Marcus had asked her to stay home while he pursued his law career. She agreed, thinking they were building something together. But now that life was gone, and Tanya had no blueprint for what came next. That evening, Jackson invited her into his study. "Just hear me out," he said, gesturing toward a soft leather chair across from his desk. "The Monroe Foundation partners with shelters, rehab centers, and community outreach groups. We're expanding a program specifically for single mothers, housing assistance, job training, childcare. We need someone who understands what that life really looks like." "You want me to be some kind of spokesperson?" Tanya asked cautiously. "More than that," Jackson said. "I want you to help build it, from the ground up." Tanya blinked, overwhelmed. "But I don't have a degree in social work or business. I've never even managed a team." Jackson leaned forward. "What you have is something no degree can give. You know the fight. You've lived it. That's worth more than any diploma." She looked away, heart thudding. "Why me?" "Because when I found you under that overpass, holding your son in the cold, you were still protecting him with everything you had left. That's the kind of woman who changes lives." Tears welled up in Tanya's eyes. She didn't cry often, but something about Jackson's words struck deep, like he saw past the exhaustion and fear and straight into the core of who she was. "I don't want to be saved," she whispered. Jackson nodded. "I'm not here to save you. I'm just giving you the tools. What you build from here, that's all you." Tanya took a deep breath. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached across the desk. "All right, I'll do it." Jackson smiled, shaking her hand. You won't regret it. Over the next few days, everything changed. Jackson set her up in a small townhouse near the foundation's headquarters. It wasn't extravagant, but it was clean, warm, and hers. He enrolled Elijah in a local daycare and arranged for a mentor to help Tanya learn the ins and outs of nonprofit work. Every day she walked into that office, she felt stronger, more herself. She started sitting in on meetings, helping design outreach programs, listening to other women's stories and realizing her voice mattered. One evening, after Elijah fell asleep, Tanya sat on her new couch and looked around the cozy space. It wasn't a mansion, but it felt like a fresh start, and she realized something powerful. She didn't need Marcus, or his family, or their approval. She was enough. She always had been. 3 months had passed since Tanya took Jackson's offer and stepped into a new life. She had gone from sleeping under bridges to attending board meetings, from shielding Elijah from cold rain to reading him bedtime stories in a warm, safe home. She still stumbled sometimes, struggled with self-doubt, but every day she showed up stronger, more confident. She was no longer just surviving. And then, the past came knocking. It was a warm Friday afternoon. Tanya had just finished presenting a new outreach strategy at the Monroe Foundation when her phone buzzed. An unknown number. She hesitated before answering. Hello? The voice on the other end froze her. Tanya, it's Marcus. Her chest tightened. She hadn't heard his voice in nearly a year. After his parents threw her and Elijah out, Marcus had vanished, too much of a coward to stand up to his family. And now just hearing his name again made old wounds throb. What do you want? She said coldly. I heard you're working for Monroe. Is that true? Tanya's stomach turned. You heard? Yeah, my dad saw a news piece about the new single mothers program. Your picture was in it. I had no idea. No idea that I survived after you abandoned us? Her voice cracked with restrained fury. No idea that your parents tossed your wife and child into the street and you never once called? I didn't know what to do, he said weakly. I thought you'd be better off with them. Wow, she said, laughing bitterly. Better off homeless? There was a pause. Can I see Elijah? That question hit like a punch to the chest. Tanya looked over at her son, who was laughing with another little boy in the office daycare across the hall. He was happy now, safe, and she wasn't about to let chaos walk back into his life. No, she said flatly. Tanya, please, he's my son too. You lost the right to call him that the day you chose your parents over us. She hung up. Her hands trembled as she stood there, tears welling in her eyes. Not from sadness, she was done crying over Marcus, but from the sudden eruption of emotions she'd buried just to survive. That evening, Jackson stopped by her townhouse to drop off some documents. He saw her face and instantly knew something was wrong. What happened? He asked gently. Tanya exhaled. Marcus called. Jackson's jaw clenched. What did he want? To see Elijah. And? I said no. Jackson nodded slowly, respecting her boundary. She looked up at him. You think I did the right thing? I think, Jackson said, you protected your son. And yourself. That's all that matters. Tanya smiled faintly. I used to think being strong meant never needing help. But now I know. It means knowing when to say no, when to walk away. He nodded. And when to walk into something better. Their eyes held for a moment, longer than before. 6 months later, Tanya stood at the podium of a packed conference hall. A banner overhead read, Empower Her, lifting single mothers nationwide. She smoothed the front of her blazer, took a breath, and looked out over the audience. Women from all over the country, many of them carrying babies, toddlers on their laps, or hope in their eyes. She had been one of them not so long ago. I used to think strength meant silence, Tanya began, her voice steady and clear. That surviving quietly was the same as thriving. But I've learned something different, something powerful. Real strength is asking for help. It's choosing your child's safety over someone else's comfort. And it's refusing to be defined by the people who walked away from you. Applause rippled through the crowd. She glanced off stage where Jackson stood beside Elijah. beaming like a proud father at a school play. After her speech, women came up to her one by one, some crying, some simply saying, "Thank you." Tanya met each one with a hug or a word of encouragement. This was more than a job now. It was a calling. That evening, back at her townhouse, she curled up on the couch with Elijah in her lap. He was a little taller now and obsessed with fire trucks and peanut butter sandwiches. "You were amazing today," Jackson said as he set 2 mugs of tea on the coffee table. "Like goosebumps level amazing." Tanya smiled, a little bashful. "I still get nervous before I speak." "That's a good thing. Means you care." She looked over at him, the quiet kindness in his eyes, the way he always saw her. Not as a charity case, not as a project, but as a partner, a leader, a mother. "You never told me why you stopped that night," she said suddenly. "Under the bridge. You could have kept driving." Jackson leaned back and looked thoughtful. "I saw Elijah's little face in the rearview mirror. Cold, scared. Something about the way you were holding him. I don't know. It reminded me of my mom. She was a single mother too. Tough as nails, just like you." Tanya smiled, blinking away tears. She raised a good man. For a moment, the silence stretched between them, warm and unspoken. Then Jackson cleared his throat. "I've been meaning to ask. There's a gala coming up for the foundation. Would you, maybe want to go with me?" Tanya chuckled. "Are you asking me on a date, Mr. Monroe?" He laughed. "I suppose I am, Ms. Carter." She looked down at Elijah, fast asleep on her chest, then back at Jackson. "You know what? I think I'd like that." That night, as the city lights shimmered outside her window and peace finally settled over her home, Tanya realized something incredible. She wasn't just someone who had survived. She had risen, and the life she was building now, with her son, her work, and maybe even love again, was brighter than anything the past could take away. A single mom and her young son are thrown out and beaten by her in-laws, left to fend for themselves. Just when all hope seems lost, a billionaire sees their struggle and offers a chance to rebuild their lives. This is a powerful story of resilience, new beginnings, and the strength to rise above hardship. If you believe in second chances and the power of kindness, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more inspiring stories like this one.